Hello everyone, I'm your host MX2, and today we'll be going over the release log for HardOps 987_23, 24, and 25. For the most part, as far as new features go, we added this option for Sculpt called Arms, which allows users to add appendages on models. However, its use also extends to object mode, where it's also attached to skin. Cycle node, which is a addition we have for geometry nodes, was also expanded upon in this update to now be a lot more functional than it was previous. Blank Material now has 3.0 support. Cycles now has proper visibility support for cutters whenever it comes to Blender 3.0. Just make sure you're up to date. Mirror now supports 3.0. In addition to that, hotkey F now is assigned for basically using flip if you ever need to go inside of Mirror and use flip. Everscroll also sees an improvement this update, allowing the user to now press Alt-A in order to show all booleans, or Shift-A in order to hide all booleans in the event that you need to just do it on the fly during the time that you're using Everscroll. In addition to that, there's been quite a few bug fixes, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So whenever it comes to flip, it's able to be accessed through mirror, so we'll just select everything and press Alt-X to bring up mirror, and we see that we're under bisect mode, which we can always press D in order to bring up the D menu in order to change our mode, and we see flip as an option. However, you can also alt scroll, where now flip is an option that you're able to scroll through the alt scroll. And in addition to that, let's say that we were to press X to just reset mirror back to defaults. We could also now press the hotkey of F, which will jump us straight to flip. So the easiest way to remember it for me is just pressing X will reset the mirror back to just being mirror. Pressing F will put you in flip mode. So when it comes to flipping, we're clicking on the side that we want to basically flip it on. However, we do also want to go under the special mirror options and maybe include active and multi-mirror flip, so that way whenever we choose to flip it on the X, it actually flips everything properly, versus if it wasn't on, whenever we chose to flip it, it would flip everything except the main mesh, resulting in a bit of a differential. So let's Control-Z undo that, Alt-X, and we go back to the top, choose to include active and multi-mirror, and whenever we choose to flip it, we get a perfect flip every time. So this mesh is comprised up out of booleans, as we can see by looking at the modifier stack. So if we press Q and we go to Everscroll, we'll already be inside of boolean scroll. And if we look at our hotkeys, we see that the hotkey of Alt-A will basically reveal all booleans, and we see that Shift-A will hide all booleans. You can still scroll through booleans and press Alt-A on the fly in order to reveal them all, and still be able to scroll and choose which one you want to have selected whenever the operation is over, in addition to revealing every single boolean possible. So this was something that was available in the previous version of Bullstack, and we just missed out on it when it came to transitioning to Everscroll, so I'm happy to announce that it has been returned. So let us go ahead and select this area, and if I press Q and we go to add modifier and we hover over skin and we look at the tooltip, we see that shift clicking will activate arms. So shift click, and from here we can just click to add a dot, and then second click to begin bringing it out, and just by control click and dragging we can begin extruding this in order to begin creating some arms very quickly. So that's really the whole point of it, is just to quickly get in and just use a skin modifier to create appendages. Another thing to take note is if you begin extending off of the central point, things can definitely get a little bit wonky. It didn't get wonky in this particular example, but let us just continue just bringing this in. We'll hold shift in order to make this a little bit smaller. And also you want to take note of these icons over on the side. By basically hovering over this one, we can activate center snap, which is available, and you can also activate mirror for the X and also flip it on the X in the event that you're working off of the other axis. You might also notice a border that's appearing occasionally whenever I move my mouse. That basically means that my mouse is out of range and the next click will actually apply the operation. So now that we see the border happening, that means I can just click and it's now applied. And the good thing is that everything is still live, meaning that the modifiers that comprise this are still present. I can just tab into edit mode, grab an area, subdivide, GG, slide it down, maybe Control A to scale this area up, maybe do the same thing here, subdivide, GG, slide it up, and just begin playing with some scales in order to create a few differentials happening with this particular piece that I'm working in. For this, we see that the root is somewhere in the middle, when really we should always have our root somewhere at the end. We can just go to our modifier since it's still live and just choose to mark it as a root, which we see actually corrects the way it was drawing. So I was talking earlier about how it could possibly get wonky. This is one of those examples where having your root not be at the very end can definitely make things a little bit odd. So this is one of the benefits of using its object mode counterpart that's attached to the skin option under add modifiers. But just like that, we were able to quickly just create some appendages on this robot. So here we are in Sculpt mode, and I just want to show a little bit more about how arms came into play and some of its additional uses besides just simply making arms. So if we press Q, we can go into it, and we have options over here on the side for basically drawing on center, but first we have to draw the shape to begin with, and then from there we can actually hover over this option for center, and we hover over it again and we see that it goes away. And from here we're able to just simply snap to the center and begin working as if center is all that matters. And this really comes in handy for times where you just don't want to have to deal with these sort of things visually. So we're snapping to center, getting it just right, maybe scaling it down a little bit. And we see how the box appears whenever there's nothing to select, indicating that whenever I click, it's going to complete the operation. So from here, I could just simply press Q, and we could actually add a primitive, which we see the add primitive has the actual icons for center, circle, and box displaying from the get-go, but we could just hover over center, and here we're actually drawing the shape strictly snap to the center area, and we can hold shift in order to just basically scale this out. So something like this, to bring our shape in, we can press Q, go to add primitive again. This time we're back to double, or basically drawing with a mirror already intact. So from here, I can just press G in order to just jump to grab, press F, adjust my focal size. And whenever I'm messing with this mode of the shapes not being voxelized together, I'll turn on the topological filter in order to get in and just make adjustments with each shape being taken into consideration individually, which is just a really nice way to control. Keep in mind, even though I'm in Sculpt mode, I'm actually using a mouse at this time, but no pain, no gain. Not saying that you should work with the mouse in Sculpt mode, just saying for this particular example, I am. So from here, we can just either merge everything together, we could press Control R, which will voxelize everything, sacrificing the resolution of our helmet a little bit, which I don't like. What I do want to do is actually tab into edit mode, and we'll just press L over each piece, press P to separate, tab back out. We're still in Sculpt mode. However, at this point, let's just firstly make sure we have only this piece selected. And I'm just going to deselect this area and bring it out. Give ourselves just a little bit extra on the next side. Then go back into Sculpt mode. We can press Control R, voxelize everything together, and just begin getting in and actually dealing with this. I'm looking at the time, of course. I want to make sure that everything is being kept timely. But if we wanted to continue on, we could just press Q. So from our default layout, we can jump over to the geometry nodes layout and just quickly create a new graph and hold Control and just cut this noodle and get started. So now by deselecting, we can press Q, go under cycle node, and just begin rolling through every node. One of the new things I want to go over first is that you can now press S in order to search. So if I wanted to say search for cube, I can type in cube, press enter, and now I'm able to basically go to cube. Another interesting thing about cycle node now is that if you have something selected and you shift click to begin appending nodes, you can now press down F in order to basically flip what you're cycling through. So now we're actually scrolling through what we would be attaching to inputs, and we could even shift scroll in order to jump which input we want to connect something to. So in this case, I'm actually looking for integer, and then from here we can actually connect that to all three of these and set this to something like 24. And let's also connect this to the end just so we see what we have going on. So from here we can also, once we begin to shift scrolling to jump through, we could also hold control and begin jumping through categories. So let's say we wanted something very specific, like for example, I want something under geometry. So we're just going to jump over to geometry where we can locate exactly what we need, which in this case is going to be split edges, but it doesn't appear to be here. So that's where S can come in handy, and I can just type in split, and we're now on split edges. So we're now going to jump off of split edges and locate what we're going for, which in this case we're looking for attributes. So I'll just roll backwards until we locate it, but a lot of rolling would be necessary in order to find it just in the long list of nodes that are available. So let us just press S and just type in, let's try it again, ATTR, and that brings us to attribute where we can capture our attribute. We'll change this over to face, change this over to be vector, and by shift jumping off we can choose what we want to connect to our output, but we can also press F to flip it back, shift scroll in order to find exactly what we want. In this case we actually want the position, so position is always right by the normal. Once I see the normal, I know that I'm right by the position. So from here we can just jump off again and go locate our set position, which sometimes I'll just scroll until I get tired of it. Just press S and just type in set, and we see that gives us set position. So we just move that over. Let's also go ahead and reconnect this to our output. So now we have our position that's being captured from every face. Then we have our set position. So from here, let's just cycle again, except we're just going to shift jump to the second one, and we are going to press S to search and just type in mix, and let's just jump up to color because that's the category that I'm actually looking for. So sometimes specifically exactly what you want. In this case it's only showing me this option. Let's actually look under our add menu under what we have going on under color, and what we wanted was to mix RGB, but because the outputs have these differentials going on, it's hard to convince them to let the mix show up whenever you're scrolling with the vector. So more on that another time, but let's go ahead and just connect these two. And this is basically the result that I'm going for, is basically a dissolving cube. So we cycle in, bringing this up and down, and this is basically our result. So I'm just going to shift right click, place my cursor, shift A, and we're just going to bring in a sphere, right click, and lower the scale of our empty. Select the cube to bring back up our graph, but we'll drag our empty into the node graph. And from here, we're just going to jump off of this, looking for vector math, which is right here. And we will choose distance. And we see that once you go to distance from something like add or multiply, that the output's no longer a vector. So just something to keep in mind. This was something that we aim to resolve in this latest update. So let us bring in our face. So now we're calculating the distance between our empty and this one. And let's also set this to relative. I'm not sure if I've been actually doing that in the past properly, but by jumping off of this, we can quickly just locate a math. However, we see that, math is add. And let's also change this to be maybe power, not exponent, maybe 1.5. And from here, let us connect this to the factor. and now we have it where whenever we move our empty around, it will scale these faces down to 0. So something very basic, but just one of the ways that I've been kind of just having fun whenever it comes to geometry nodes and testing out the cycle node to attempt to see how it could be faster and what ways it succeeds and also where it falls short. But there's definitely been a lot of improvements that's been done with it for this particular update, and this is just a small example just kind of showing how you can use it in action to get where you're going. In fact, we are so supportive of the Shift A menu that we have it part of the Q menu, where if you're looking for a very specific node, you can always go in and find your list. In fact, you can always just drop down all nodes if you just want every single node that's available, which is kind of crazy. I see that as being unnecessary. I'm a much bigger fan of just choosing a node, pressing Q, going to cycle node, and even without anything selected, you're able to just basically begin rolling through an entire category of what is being offered. So here we've brought in a map node where we can begin dealing with this in earnest if we want to tighten it up by just mapping the range to be something a little bit smaller, which we probably could have dealt with just by lowering the power, but that's a talk for another day. So here I am in an older version of Blender with the older version of HardOps and Boxcutter, and if we were to just bring up the timeline and get rid of it, bring up the outliner and get rid of that. So we have only the 3D view. If we press Control tilde, we see that there's an issue with our object properties whenever 3D view is the only view available. And this is something that was reported by a user and is now something I'm happy to announce has been resolved. So here we are in Blender 3.1.0, and we will just get rid of our timeline, and we will get rid of our properties, and we'll get rid of our outliner. And if we press Control tilde, we see that our object properties are intact. Kind of a strange bug, but I'm just happy to announce that it has been resolved. So 2Shape has also been improved for 3.0, where it's now working properly, no longer throwing an error. So I'm just going to hold Control, use a little box cutter to cut a box, press X twice in order to use intersect. From here, we'll just use dots as a jump off point here and create a perfect wedge by holding Control, Tab to pause this shape, and then we'll hold Shift whenever we click to apply it, so we have the shape kept live. With this as our selection, we can press QOT, which will activate 2Shape, and we can just roll the wheel until we get around to cylinder, which is the shape that we want to create. And from here, we can just press A in order to adjust our scale. And once we have it where we want, we could click to apply, and we now have this shape created. And just like that, we are now able to use this shape inside of Blender 3.0. So using Bullscroll, we'll recall that shape, scale up just a little bit more to prevent any boolean errors from occurring. But just like that, we now have 2Shape support in Blender 3, where it's no longer throwing an error. So map scroll is one of our options inside of Alt-M whenever it comes to HardOps, which is basically our material menu. So one of the main components of using map scroll is specifying a path in your preferences. So if we press Control K, we could bring up our preferences just in the 3D view. And if you look at your maps folder, you can see that, I already have a path set for my particular maps. But before we get in and begin doing that, I'm just going to select a piece and just shift click material scroll to just scroll to something that'll be a little bit more accommodating for what we plan to do. From here, I can press Alt-M again and jump into map scroll, and just press E to just begin bringing up random maps. And I'm holding Alt and moving the mouse back and forth in order to adjust the amount of brightness, just so I can see things a little bit better. We could continue to press E in order to just jump the map and look at alternative combinations. And just like before, you can hold Control Shift and move your mouse in order to begin activating bump. So we'll bring in just a little bit of bump, maybe even hold Control and adjust the scale of things just a little bit for this. And we still have the flexibility of being able to press E and just jump through these random maps until we find absolutely the perfect map that speaks to us. So with that, let's just click and apply, and just wanted to show that map scroll is now working properly in Blender 3.0 and above. So for this example, I'll press Q, place a bevel, and then from here just draw a box, put a wedge on it, and we'll just hit it with a blank material. And let's change our render engine to cycles, and we'll be using GPU today. We'll press Alt VB in order to just roll a blank light setup into our scene. Click and apply. Maybe even increase our roughness. And for this, I want to enable the visibility of our cutters just to display that there's no longer an issue with cutter visibility whenever it comes to cycles in Blender 3.0. This was also an issue that a user reported. Happy to announce that it has been resolved. Here we are in an older version of Blender, and using Boxcutter, we're just going to cut a few quick cuts in this box. And from here, if we press Ctrl-Shift-B, we bring up the Hops Bevel Boolean helper, which if we enable Booleans, we can see that this allows us to go in very quickly and enable the Booleans, making them visible. But there's also a bug where basically if we just press A and select everything, then X and delete everything, if we press Ctrl-Shift-B, we see that we get an error because there's no object present. So just a strange one. Let's go ahead and minimize that and go over to the current version of Blender, Blender 3.1.0. And we press X and delete the cube. We can press Ctrl-Shift-B, and we see that there's no longer an error coming up. So while it's a very strange situation to be pressing hotkeys for a bevel boolean helper without an object being present in your scene, it is at least now resolved. So Bullstack is also now working properly for Blender 3. So to show it in action, if I have this object selected, I press Q and I go to stack, we can see that now this has been compressed into becoming a geometry node setup instead of just a bunch of booleans. Same thing with this one. Press Q, stack, and we've now stacked this into being a 5 boolean single stack. And we could also alt click in order to unstack in the event that we ever need to. But we'll just go through, stack that, select this one. That one only has 1 boolean, so we won't even bother stacking it. We'll stack this one. Select this door. We see this one has quite a few booleans. Go through and stack it. Just like that, stacking is now back to being supported inside of Blender 3.0.